Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Trevor Watkins. I'm the head of sport and entertainment at Pinsent Mason's international professional services firm, but also happened to go and watch AFC Bournemouth when I was a kid, and then ended up running and owning the club after a supporters rescue for 5 years. So I'm delighted actually to be sitting here this afternoon with three good friends and colleagues who have, in their own right, gone in and stepped in to do a huge amount within English football. Our three guests today are all based over here, however, and to my left, Kevin Willer. Kevin, I've known a number of years, one of the first two employees at Google in Chicago, when Google had less than 200 people generally. But a lifetime since, which we'll touch on, that has seen you go into women's football, investor at Leyton Orient. Shilen Patel in the middle. Shilen, actually a resident not far from here, grew up in the area and finds himself now as the owner of West Bromwich Albion, first Indian American owner of an English professional soccer team. And last but not least, on the end, Dre London. Dre, many of you may well know for his career within music, managing Post Malone and many other artists. Also owner and founder of a leading tequila company, I'm told. Correct. And a minority investor at Crawley Town. So from Brixton to living in the US and now minority investor there. I think this is going to be a hugely entertaining discussion over the next sort of 35, 40, 45 minutes. We're asked to talk about ownership in the terms of being custodians and only temporary custodians of the game. I remember when we did the fans rescue at Bournemouth, that it was, we need to rescue it. We need to preserve it. It's been around 100 years. But for you, Shilen, you grew up here. You grew up in Florida. Family of doctors, healthcare. What started your relationship with soccer?
I think that my first proper exposure was I was in Europe during World Cup '98. I was quite young, about to go to college. And going from country to country and all these pubs and just kind of understanding the relationship between fans and the players and the teams and everything, I think was transformative for me. And then, for those of you around my age, when you go to college and in the dorm room, there's a few games that are played, FIFA being one, and so that sort of built up the passion. But I think the business of football was something that was always really fascinating to me, and I think the fact that for me, being a kid in Florida and kind of building a relationship with English football and global football, I think it spoke to the power and the reach of the sport. It's about competition, but it's also about stories and stories unfolding. And I think that the unparalleled history of English football in particular, but I think the history that comes with each club is just such a phenomenal thing to be a part of. And I'd seen, not with as we call it in Florida, soccer, but with our local teams, growing up the road in Tampa, you saw when those teams were doing well, the feel of the town changed, and when they were on a run of success, the reputation of the city sort of elevated. And so that relationship between a club and its the locale, but then also this idea that people in Switzerland and Africa and India and America care about this club too was so powerful to me.
And what was the first game you saw in '98 at the World Cup?
I wasn't. I got the pub view.
Oh, you got the pub view.
So I did not get to go to any matches. But it's funny. You go through and Romania's playing somebody, and all of a sudden you go in. There's like 55 Romanians in in Prague that are that are doing what. And it's just like wherever you went, just seeing people kind of gather together to watch the sport, whether for love of the for love of the side or for love of the sport. It was just amazing.
And for you, Kevin, I mean, I'm sure the audience would love to hear a bit more. But what took you into football? Took you into soccer and sport?
Yeah, I was just going to say, when you're talking about the World Cup, 1994, the first World Cup match was in Chicago, actually, which was kind of an interesting.
And that's your hometown.
Yeah, it's my hometown. And thanks for having me, by the way. I appreciate you having me out here. I studied in London in college, abroad, for a semester, and there was no sports to watch, and got really into English football because you just had to. It was what was going on around there, right? Got into the Premier League, and then always said to myself, like, I'd love to, maybe get involved in a team at some point, maybe get to invest. the Premier League's above my pay grade. It just is what it is. So I was looking at a club that was more accessible. We met through some great people in Chicago, and you introduced me to Nigel Travis, our chairman at Leyton Orient Football Club. Who's heard of the Leyton Orient Football Club? Anybody? All right, we got some.
Oh, they got some new competing fans, actually. There'll be tickets to any West Brom, Crawley, or Leyton Orient game out of this.
We've been around since 1881, so we've got some history. But we had to run into some hard times a few years ago, and some investors got involved, and now are in League One. Though in the lower half, we got to keep working really hard. But it's great. I mean, we're in London, and we have a great supporters group, and it's been a lot of fun. So we'll talk more about that.
I mean, Dre, born in Brixton.
Yes.
You come over to America.
Yes.
Hugely successful in music. I mean, my 12-year-old is incredibly excited that I happen to know the manager of Post Malone. But your passion and having built that career, Crawley Town, 16% shareholder, thereabouts. Why football? Why get involved?
I know, I was thinking the same thing. So, why football? Because I had to look back at how I was going to give back. Like, me coming back home and doing stuff more back home after leaving England in 2008. I left and I came here to seek this entertainment dream. I didn't even know I was going to be a manager, agent. I just said, I'm going to leave England. I'm going to be the biggest thing I could be in America in the music business. Obviously, there was a lot of hills and valleys to that, a couple of couches and a couple of other stuff on the route to getting there. But after discovering Post, making him the biggest thing in the world, one of the top 5 artists in the whole world, going on tours, doing all the things I'd done, I said to myself, how am I going to give back? How can I change the future for someone that looks like me? And I had to dig deep and say to myself, where are you coming from? And where I'm coming from is from England, South London, where I used to kick a ball around in a estate, in the concrete estates, kicking a ball, like all inner city London dudes understand this. And I went from kicking a ball there to playing for South London to playing for Crystal Palace when I was young. Then I got an injury when I was 13 years old, and I started liking light-skinned girls and Nikes, and it all went out the window. So after that, I guess the entrepreneurial side came in while I was in school. I left school, and by the time I'd been through so much things in England, from selling properties to doing this to doing that, when I got to 28 years old, I said I was going to go to America and just make a change, because I felt like there was a ceiling at the time in the entertainment business in the UK. Not now, but back then there was. So I came here seeking, and what I found after 8-9 years became Post Malone. And taking that to where I taken it, I just said to myself, how on God's green earth am I going to give back to the inner city youths that grew up like me? I'm going to go and get involved in football. It was a crazy thing how it all started. It was actually me and Idris Elba. We was having a conversation, and Robert Earl told me that Charlton was up for sale some time ago, and it all started from there. And when the journey started, at first I was like, me, a football club owner? No way. No way. And then the more I started thinking about it, and then I traveled to Dubai one time, and I met up around Qatar time with the World Cup, and I was with Titus Bramble, and he'd shown me a long group text with all these different ex-black soccer players, and I think this was what really did it for me. He said that all these ex-players, Les Ferdinand, this one, that one, they all wanted to be in management, coaching, and they wanted to have more of a chance that they were getting in football. And I think that's what really struck it for me. When I was thinking, hold on, there's no one actually representing the people of color in football. And I know we had this here in America in the NFL until Magic Johnson went and bought the Washington Commanders. But I said, like a crazy guy, I'm going to have to be the Power Ranger and try and bring this back to England and mix the American entertainment side of things with the British tradition, if that makes sense. And bridging the two, I know we could do something different. So that's what brought me on that crazy wild journey.
I think we'll come back to Crawley Town, and actually I think you two play each other on Boxing Day. 20th against 21st. There'll be the Shilen's mediating in the middle at the moment. But Shilen, I mean, I saw Kevin was trying to steal that heritage in 1881. You're 1878. I made a note of this. Salter's Spring Works that turned into the West Bromwich Albion Strollers. But yeah, you've taken over a historic club. What does ownership mean to you? 146 years of history you've inherited.
Yeah, I mean, I think you compare 146 years to I've been there 9 months now, so I think that the reality of your place in the history of a club like that is very apparent, and I think it's impossible to kind of ignore. And just walking through the stadium, walking through the training ground, seeing these bits of history and memorabilia from the 1800s and and stories of players being signed in the trenches in World War I and all of that, and the fans that come and talk to you about generations of fandom. I think all of that just leaves a huge impression on you. It makes it very clear from day one that you're here for a little while, and you have a responsibility to kind of bridge the gap. And there's a board there's several boards in the in the stadium, but one of them is all the former chairmen of the club, and it's a long list, and you just kind of see that I'm going to be there. There's going to be many names that follow me, and so you understand that in that moment it's the responsibility that you have, but you're never bigger than the club. You're never bigger than the history of the club.
And it's not your first foray into football. Bologna, so you have some experience there, but against that, all your healthcare businesses, phenomenally successful. What's been the difference in becoming an owner of a club to the owner of a healthcare business?
Well, I think it's the business of football is so fascinating to me, and I think that when you look at North American leagues like NFL or NHL or NBA, there's this parity that's sort of built into the rules and how the competition works, and they have one goal: it's to win a championship, win a championship, win a championship. Football is very different. I think that there's in the Premier League there's a count on one hand the clubs that can realistically have that goal at the start of the season. Some people may find themselves up in those regions, but 5 that are telling themselves that's what we have to do this year. For everybody else, and then you go down into the lower tiers, it's just like the business world. It's each of these is its own business. Yep. Each of them can develop its own winning strategy. Yep. Each of them has its own strengths that are intrinsic to the community, to the history of the club, the infrastructure. So to me, as a business nerd, I really responded to that. And I spent 20 years running healthcare technology companies. I could walk through this entire casino and I might find, a dozen people who want to talk to me about, claims adjudication software and insurance companies. But you mentioned football and the conversation doesn't go any further than that. So it's amazing to be, like the relationship that people have to it. But to me, that business aspect, and then as an investor, and I know you've got that investment background, it's just, you think about the progression of players, and it's almost like, venture capital, private equity, IPO, these players have to move through stages, and they need somebody to kind of foster their career through those stages. And I think that aspect that, you can, it's not just about, signing a superstar, but helping to build a superstar, these other things that you can do to kind of contribute to the fabric of the game and the sport is pretty amazing.
And then it was interesting. I was in New York last week at another conference, and they were saying the sector is worth about $500 billion. And the forecast from David Blitzer and Mark Lasry and others, speaking to them, it's going to double in the imminent future. Your business, Chicago Ventures, you make your investment decisions. You look at what you're going to put in. You back some great things like Cameo. Is Leyton Orient an investment or a whim, or what is it for you?
Yeah, and I should be very clear. The title thing. Chicago Ventures, my venture capital firm, and we invest in tech companies. We do not invest in soccer teams. I personally invest in soccer teams, so it's a separate thing. But you're totally right, Trevor. A lot of this is very similar to venture investing and angel investing, right? Like you might invest in a tequila company, and you might crush it. Sounds like you are, or you might lose a bunch of money. Who knows? These are, in the tech parlance, these are angel investments, right? And my approach has been more build a portfolio of them. I really respect what you've done, going all in on one or two. I'd like to do that one day, but right now it's like, let's build a portfolio. Let's learn. let's try and figure out what not to do, and I've had a bit of that, which I can talk about later. And then learn all the good things, and then across cultures, England versus the U.S., and men's and women's, and just trying to understand what makes a great club, and try and bring those learnings across the club. So it's kind of that multi-club strategy, I guess, but not moving players around as much as it's moving learnings around.
So it's business learnings, but a different way of owning. I mean, Dre, it's interesting picking up on something you were saying about your vision. It sounds like you've got a kind of new ownership model that you're looking at. Perhaps it'd be great to hear a little bit more about that and what you think for the future, not being specific to any club, but what your vision is.
I see like the future of everyone's not that football has not been soccer, not that football has ever not grown and been growing, but I feel like the rate of it growing right now, and with the women sports getting more coverage, same like basketball, I think it's growing at a huge rate. And everyone, I'm not going to be biased because I'm from England, everyone's finding out what the best league in the world is. Like, as he knows, an ex-player, I see him over there. It's the best league in the world. So at the end of the day, I see so much, and without giving away too much, I just see a lot of crossing of entertainment and the entertainment side and sports, if that makes sense. And Tottenham's a good example of what they've done at their stadium, where you're watching season games, and then all of a sudden, like I was there a couple of weeks ago, I'm watching an NFL game, and then a couple of months before that, you was watching a Burna Boy concert with 60, 70,000 people there. So that's what I see, that's what I saw, and that's what I vision for the future of football. And just like I said, bringing the American style to England. There's the one thing, this is going to sound crazy to you guys, but and I only started looking at it when I moved to America. I wouldn't say we did a halftime show. We opened up the Super Bowl last year. And I can't believe that there's a World Cup and there's no halftime shows. Like, everyone who watches the Super Bowl, and all Americans say the Super Bowl is the biggest event in the world, and I keep telling them there's a World Cup, but they don't listen to me.
I hope they will in 2026.
They don't want. But I'm like, how do you get all of this hype from a halftime show, and then you have something like the World Cup, there's no halftime show. You have something like the Premier League, and there's no halftime shows. And of course, I think about it, it's so passionate. If you're losing 3-0 or 4-0 at halftime, you don't want Eminem or someone coming in, because you're going to be like, F this guy, I don't want to hear this guy. We're down 3-4-0. What do you want me to jump up and down for? But you understand, there's just different things that I think can be brought in. And without giving it away too much, like Trevor was saying, some of my crazy ideas that I have for this sport, from what I've done and what I've seen in my career, now I want to be able to go back home and get different people who didn't actually have the chance to get involved in football, didn't get the chance to get around it, from designers to this to that. They've got no entrance to get in. And I was explaining to Trevor, like, that's what I want to do. I want to be able to give opportunities to people who wouldn't have a straight path to be able to get into football.
So this is it just about football? Or are you looking at it as sport as a catalyst for growth?
I'm looking at sport as a catalyst for growth. If you really want me to tell you the truth, I looked at Crawley and I said, okay, it's on the outskirts of South London where I come from. I'm going back home to South London. What can I do here? What's the smart thing? Come together with a group and don't just, like what you said earlier, when a football team is winning, or when a town has a football team that they can feel proud of, you can start building stuff around that town, and you're now creating jobs, and you're creating so many things for the community. That's how I looked at it. I looked at it like it was like the South London boy story of going back home and going to help the community, and also hopefully getting paid while doing it.
Fantastic. I mean, Shilen, we mentioned earlier, you've been involved in Bologna, West Bromwich Albion, you're based here. 3 very different cultures and environments. Where do you see differences in the relationship between the club and the fans and ownership?
I mean, I think I would say in both in Bologna and West Bromwich Albion, I think that there's the relationship is an intense one. There was a story when we were acquiring when the Bologna process was going through, and fans were not very happy. Very common story. Hopefully, I'm not on the wrong end of it sometimes. But fans weren't happy with weren't happy with ownership, and were very keen to see the takeover go through. And there was supposed to be a meeting between a member of our group and the mayor of Bologna. And the fans found out he was going to Rome for some other meetings. They blocked his driveway so that he couldn't go to Rome. But it just gives you a sense of what it means, and this, similarly with West Bromwich Albion. I mean, I think it was the passion and the mandate of the fans that forced the change. And so I think that this idea that it's our club. You might have a business whatever technical ownership of it, but you're running our club.
Yeah, that's what Trevor told me. Like at the end of the day, and that's also a reason why. If I still lived in England, I'm going to tell you all in this room, I would never have done this. I would never have still lived in England and had any ownership in a football club. No way. They'll find out where you live. Like you said, they'll block the guy's door. You go in to buy a business and try and a champion. A couple of games go wrong or something goes wrong. All of a sudden, you got fans outside your door or letters telling you what to do in your life. I can't do that. So I said, I'll do it from America and go back and forth. If I had to live in England, I don't think I could do it. That's how passionate.
A safe option. I mean, Dre
that passionate over there. These fans, it's their club. It's not yours.
Dre mentioned NFL. And of course, we were together, Chicago Bears, a few weeks ago in London. NFL, passionate fans, different type of ownership?
100%. I mean, that's just a whole nother level, of wealth, obviously, with the latest clubs going for $6 billion, and now private equity money coming into it, right? But the fans in those leagues, I would argue, or the supporters, don't have to, or the owners don't have to listen to the supporters as much. I'm a Chicago Bears fan. They've been terrible forever. They don't have to deal with people coming to your house or blocking your driveway or whatever. We Leyton Orient Football Club, as we were talking about earlier, in 2014, we were a penalty kick away from at Wembley from the championship, and then the club was sold to an Italian billionaire who did a very poor job running it. And it went down to the National League, and the supporters were going crazy, and they forced the sale to Nigel Travis, and he's helped bring it back up and with our investment group. But yeah, you can't in the NFL.
I think that's the difference. You can't get relegated in the NFL.
They can pick up and move, and without the fans having any say.
Yeah, for real, because the Raiders, they're now in Vegas. So you're right. They can pick up and move, and it's a different franchise. And now everyone's going to Vegas to go and watch an NFL game. So you're right. It's kind of crazy. But in England, it's where you come from. It's the tradition of your local town. It's your kids. It's like 70 years of your life, 50 years. When you're going to tell an old guy that's been supporting this team, buying the shirt for 50 years that he has no say? It just doesn't work like that. It just doesn't. And the one thing is that relegation. That relegation is it. Like you said, that's what makes it different to the American sports. That relegation zone is horrid, as we know.
Yeah, I think for those of you who were here last year, Kevin was actually on my panel last year, and we had a lady from Barnsley that was being very dismissive of, it was Nigel as well, very dismissive of American football, soccer, and the MLS as not being a real competition.
Right,
there's no relegation.
And the debate about bringing Pro-Rel to the US and if that'll ever happen, right?
Indeed. So against that background, NFL, different ownership, you're not going to get your drive blocks. Dre, ultimately, most clubs lose money. So why put money in? I mean, is there a different way forward? Do you think clubs can actually end up being clubs that can be sustainable?
Yes, I think it can, and we've seen that with a recent model of Wrexham. They came in, they wasn't even in a league. I can't go into the depths of what I've heard, but TV money came and helped them buy the club. They didn't even take a penny out of their pocket. Now the club has got TV rights, sponsorship. The first season it was TikTok on the shirt, this, that, a story behind it. Hulu and Disney in the UK. Next, they're buying players, and they go up and they're in League Two, and they're buying players from the Championship. And they're now look like they're going to go up again. So yes, and I'm not saying everyone has that story, but yes, there's more to it now. There's a lot more that's surrounding it. And on top of some of the things I'm thinking with modern day merch, with real estate, there's a lot of things that you can dress around that club and around the town. If you notice, Newcastle, if anyone's ever been to Newcastle and seen them, their stadium is in the city center, in the middle of the city center. Like, so when you own that club, you're in trouble because that is the heartbeat of the town, and they're watching every single thing you do. But like I said, there's so many different things now that you can add to it. You're correct. They do in general lose money. So you're thinking, why would you do it? You have to have hopes and dreams to do things big. And that's the main reason why I got involved in it. And that's the main reason why I'm doing it, because I have hopes and dreams of leaving a story when I'm gone. You're only living one time in life. So when I'm gone, at least my story can be I came back home and I changed the town outside of South London. If I do that, I'm happy.
I tell you though, one of the few clubs that has done well financially is West Bromwich Albion over the years. So as a philosophy of ownership, obviously, Shilen, you've come in at a time when the previous owner had hit some difficulties, geopolitical, financial, and so on. What is your philosophy of ownership? I mean, fifth in the league, unbeaten, although a lot of draws, but really nicely positioned. How's the club going forward? What are the ownership principles?
So I think that was one of the things that was really interesting about West Bromwich Albion was that they had found a way to kind of sustain without always having to kind of dig into into the pockets of ownership. And I think it again it comes from kind of setting the right goals, having certain success metrics, and you have to have your if the definition of sustainable might you have to nail down what you mean by that. But I think that there is a path because the right players get more valuable over time, the right clubs get more valuable over time. And again, I think in the world of tech, you kind of understand this. You put in, and then you have validation that wow, this thing is truly grown in value. And so I think but I think that it's important to understand kind of what is set your level of ambition correctly. And then I've seen certain clubs like more recently like a Brighton or some clubs like that do it as well, where they kind of have their operating philosophy, they have their strategy, and that strategy prevails over any personality within the club, whether that's a player or a manager. It's governed by a philosophy, and that kind of keeps it all together.
Really great example. I love the Brighton example.
That's Brighton making a profit.
That's exactly what I look at, the Brighton example. And Brighton's not just thinking how we are, like how the same way we're thinking. Brighton's not just thinking local Brighton town. Brighton is thinking global. They have scouts all over the country, all over the world, looking for the finest players. And that's what I feel having ownership outside England can do. It doesn't just keep it narrow-minded, that you can have the best players coming from the US, the best players coming from Brazil, Africa, and all these different places. So that's the model I actually look at and say, look at Brighton, look what they did. It's a philosophy. It's a system. You either it works or you work without a system, and you've seen the clubs that don't.
Well, and I think Dre's totally right on. I mean, looking at other revenue streams and finding other ways to monetize, whether it's the assets or the stadium or around the stadium or whatever. Because the reality is, and it's crazy to me, everybody's got to publish their financials, right? Mm-hmm. And you could look ours up. We lost a few £1 million last year, but management would say we lost less than other clubs in our league, so we're doing better. I'm like, that doesn't make a ton of sense. But then it begs the question, not to be the contrarian here, but like, is all this? I mean, I think is there 30 clubs in England that have American investors at this point? From the top, at least. Is all this investment money kind of propping up a lot of these clubs? And if they're not run really well, and they don't have a North Star and like values and stick with the strategy, are we going to see a bunch of clubs have a lot of struggles?
And that is fascinating because, I mean, we've got 130, 140 people now in our team, Pinsent Masons, doing this kind of work. I would never in a million years have thought that when I got involved in taking over Bournemouth. There's a whole industry. I won't talk about lawyers, but anyway, as to talking of bad words, though, is profit a bad word in football?
I mean, if you could somehow be profitable and compete on the pitch and get to the next level, that'd be great. I don't know if it's reasonable now.
I think my team is a great example of that. Arsenal. Can you be profitable? That team's been run like a lean machine for over 20 years. Whether they've won the league or they haven't, I think you look at the Arsenal philosophy from buying players like Anelka when they were young, that wasn't worth nothing, to selling Anelka, ending up the money from selling Anelka, building a whole training ground. Like, you're saying, can football make money? How can you be mad at the profit of football when you can do stuff like that? And then they've sold their old ground, Highbury. And what did they do with it after they sold it? They built houses on it and built apartments. So how can anyone be mad at the word profit? We're taking a gamble at a business that's losing. So the number one thing is to get that P word, pushing P.
Well, it's interesting when we're talking about custodianship as to, in your businesses where you've invested money and it turns a profit, you probably expect a dividend.
I was going to say dividend might be a bad word. Profit is not. Yeah, I think the expectation is always, if the club is successful, to reinvest, and I don't think that that's an unfair expectation. And then, the trade-off is, you measure, you kind of measure success by value, right? And I think that the more that you can do, the more valuable the club can be, and there's particular value in a club that doesn't need a whole bunch of money every year as well. So
I agree. I don't like that word, but I do, and you guys, and I'm sure everyone in the room likes, you put money in, you want it back out. Like, there's a time you want it to be up and running by itself. So maybe the word dividend that they use in the UK isn't the best word, but we all need some dividend at the end.
I tell you, so something we're working on, and I'm losing track of time given travel, it's either today or tomorrow, but our government in England is deciding that it's going to regulate football. Is football incapable of regulating itself in England? Why does it need the government?
Us lower division teams would love a little bit of revenue sharing down the stack, right?
I agree with that one. The revenue share, I agree with, but the government getting involved in the national sport is kind of crazy. I don't think they need to. I think it has its own government. It has the FA. It has the EFL. It doesn't need the government to be involved. We already have William, the head of the FA, or some shit. Like, we don't need any more. We need any more than that. We got royalty. We got royalty involved in the head of the FA watching football matches. Now we need the government too.
Well, I think it's interesting because this was a very active conversation when I was diligencing the club, and this idea that a deal was imminent, right? But in order for the Premier League really holds all the cards, and it's somewhat somewhat of a discretionary thing for them. They can be pressured or cajoled or whatever, but ultimately, they have the funds and they decide how what they're going to do. The problem is the Premier League is 20 clubs and 14 of them need to agree for any change whatsoever to be made. And no matter what sort of distribution scheme you propose, there are at least 6 clubs who are going to be opposed to it. So even when you say we're okay with the revenue share, the big revenue clubs are going to say, well, all right, we each contribute 1/20th. And the smaller clubs are going to say, well, actually, why don't we do it based on transfer spend or revenues or something like that? So then all of a sudden you have these factions, and there's always at least 6 people who don't want something to change. And so I think I'm not keen on sort of just reveling in sort of regulation and things like that. But there's a fundamental inability for the Premier League to agree within itself that something is fair.
And it will be interesting to see what the government do, whether it's actually got teeth in what it enacts. Kevin, you said you'd like to see a bit more revenue sharing. How would your view?
No, I didn't say that. I just said there was talk of profit share, whatever they were going to do, like pass it down. But there were going to be restrictions around it, how we spent it, and then all the lower division clubs were, we're getting the same thing, so we probably, wouldn't really benefit anybody more than anybody else. We'd hopefully do a lot with it.
Do you change if Leighton Orient were in the Premier League?
Sure, yeah, but we're not. But this goes to another thing that I think you were hitting on, and I'd love to hear you.
No,
Like,
I agree with you. I think it needs to happen because if all these countries around the world are watching the Premier League, if they have all these TV rights, what is that, 160, 170 million a year that the clubs, every club in the Premier League is earning, what is it bad sending some form of a small shelter down to the clubs below that makes it more competitive? If at the end of the day, you don't just want it to be the kings at the top and then everyone else is scratching for change and losing money. So at some point, there should be some level ground that keeps it competitive. Like, we all love the FA Cup. We all love watching what Brentford has done. If you've seen Brentford, like even just Luton getting up and people talking about they having to cross people's houses to get to the stadium, to get to the stand. like we all like to see that story, and everyone, including the American dream, likes to see a David versus Goliath. So that's going to help that, bringing more money to the lower league teams, because that's the grassroots of football.
But I think it goes down to two. Like, what's your goal? What's our goal? We all have different goals here, probably, and why we got involved with this club and what we want it to be. Like, to your point, I don't think Leyton Orient probably ever gets to the Premier League. Maybe it does.
But no, you asked me.
But
Bournemouth 3 times in 100 years in the Championship, and yet we're now in the Premier League.
There you go. Right, but
it's achievable.
But Wrexham has clearly stated they want to get to the Premier League. That is going to cost a lot of money, and that is going to try their investors. Patience. I would think. We'll
Smart
see.
Moves.
I mean, what's your goal?
No, I think certainly it's playoffs every year until we don't need the playoffs anymore because we're up in the Premier League.
Yes, actually, you're right. We just went up from the playoffs. Everyone laughed at me and thought I was crazy when I was buying Crawley and buying into it, because they were in 15th place. I think I was telling you, Trevor, they were in 15th place last season, and everyone looked at me kind of crazy and thought I was doing something crazy. But I said to Tobias, who I put in place to be the director of football there, I said, I really feel that we could get to this playoffs. I know this sounded crazy. I thought exactly like how V did. And I said, even though they're in 15th, all they need is one good run. Everyone's beaten everyone in the league. One good run, and they could be in the playoffs. It went down to the final game of the season within 6 months of me being involved in the club, bringing my energy. As you could probably see, I'm very passionate. Bringing my energy around the ownership and bringing my ideas and what we could do. They had to have done something, because within 6 months, the final day of the season, we won and we were in the 7th place. Then it's who's good on the day. Then we played Milton Keynes and beat them 2 games in a row at their home and at our home. And then I couldn't believe it. This is what I'm trying to tell you about the magical story of football. Within 6-7 months, I'm putting on a suit and tie to go to Wembley to the playoff finals. And then we won, and now we're up in the league. So there's
And how does that? Because you've had some incredible highs in the music industry. How does it compare? You came up with the idea of streaming, and you've got a triple platinum record streaming. How does the excitement of that compare to being able to go to Wembley?
It's kind of the same. It's like it's not the same, but it is kind of the same. It's like your first art, like your artist, the guy you discovered performing at Madison Square Gardens. It's like me going back to England and selling out the O2 for 2 nights with 20,000 people with this guy who only had 600 followers when I discovered him. It had the same feeling, but it was actually a little more butterflies, because you put your money into it and then you start watching every Saturday. You start putting you start becoming passionate about this thing on a Saturday morning, because it's in America. We're watching a different time. Every Saturday or weekend, you're putting your passion into this. So when you know that there's some form of a win, or you can get a win at the end, it gives you that great feeling, because it was like I was looking at my own shoulder and saying, I told you so, listen to your gut, because it was real. Not to say that we're not in a religation battle already at the beginning of next season, but I'm just telling you, we plan to do the playoffs again.
Can I would just, my happy place is Brisbane Road. I love getting the suit on and the tie on. And then we actually won League Two. We won the cup a couple years ago. And being there for the trophy presentations, we went around the pitch and clapped the fans. It was like, it's a beautiful London day. It was just, that makes it all worthwhile. It's so great.
But there is heartache in football. Trust me, I know there's heartache in football. It's not all fun and games and playoffs and going to Wembley. There's
No,
also
I'd said, I was just talking earlier, we're 2 down at Everton with 3 minutes to go and somehow win 3-2. And equally, we've been playing Barrow 1 up and losing 2-1. It's, it's incredible. I mean, Shilen, you spoke earlier. We're coming towards the end of our session. We could probably talk for hours. You talked about the nature of it being temporary. When the time comes for you to pass that baton of ownership over, what is it you would most look back on with great pride? What is it you hope you'll have achieved?
I mean, I think that pride is the big thing, right? You want people to be proud of that time that you were in charge. You want them to, and that was the impression that sports made upon me, was that, when you have a team that you're proud of, and you have people in your community, players, athletes in your community that you're proud of, that are proud to be a part of it, I think the whole feeling of that, and oftentimes the wins come, but even when they don't, I think that's really, I think sports fans are pragmatic. Only a few people get to celebrate at the end of a small proportion get to celebrate at the end of the year. But I think in the meantime, it's just being proud of what's happening. I think pride and hope. If you can say that your tenure, delivered those things to fans, then I think that's really the success that you can hope for.
And Dre, Kevin, what are your thoughts?
Well said. That was perfect. I feel like we should end on that. No,
We've got a minute and 5
I
seconds.
know. And Dre's got to have the last word because so cool to hear from you.
Well, he hasn't brought any tequila. So
right? Are we going to do tequila later? Is that?
Yeah, we can later.
we'll come back to that in a second. But go on. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say. I mean, it's been a great fun. We have a great ownership group. We will, there will be a day when Nigel Travis will, probably, bring in some additional investors, right? I always want to be a small part of it, though. Like that's the key. I never want to give it up, right? Ever. But you do get, scared is not the word, but you don't want to bring the wrong people. You want to make sure whoever comes next chairman on the board, like you talked about, next partners in this thing, bringing new people in, they're going to take it hopefully to the next level, whatever that is. It's not just in the standings; it's in the,
that's the same as me.
Dre, it does fall to you to have the last word.
Give it to Dre.
I just look at the same thing as what these guys are saying, but there's no comparison. But I look at this tradition of owning a football club as a generation, and as you've seen in America, we've just gone through an election where the generation of now is going to talk about the next 4 years. So that's how I'm looking at it. What's going to happen in 5 to 10 years from now, 20 years, when someone else comes in, or whatever the time is? Did you serve your purpose for that town, for that football club, and did you help them grow for the future generations to tell the story?
Well, I tell you, Crawley Town, West Bromwich Albion, Leighton Orient, definitely got a few more fans now in the audience. Gentlemen, thank you so much for sharing. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you for having us.